My name is Victoria. I'm the National Partnerships Manager with Represent Women. If you are just getting familiar with Represent Women, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is dedicated to addressing the systemic barriers that stop women, and especially women of color, from being able to achieve political power. So I'm pretty sure, again, I've met most of you, but if I haven't, it's nice to meet you, and I look forward to getting to know you and chat with you a little bit more. And welcome to the Women's Power Collaborative Lunch and Learn series. We do this every single month, which is so great. And for those of you getting a little bit more familiar with the Women's Power Collaborative, it is the only national level body that combines women's representation efforts with efforts focused on democracy reform in the spirit, again, of women and boosting women's political power. And we are so happy to be able to bring you these lunch and learns every single month through, I believe, October, which is really exciting. So we want these to be member only times for you to come and hear from experts and to learn more as it pertains to democracy reform or women's representation or both. So again, these are member only drop-in lunch and learns. And so we're really, really excited for the lunch and learn today that is on the viability of women candidates. So before I kick it over to Whitney, just some housekeeping general information, of course, which is, again, introduce yourself in the chat. It's open. Feel free to put questions, comments, links in there as necessary. We have until 2 p.m. Eastern time. So as much time as we need within the hour, and we will have Whitney go through her presentation, and then we will open it up to some questions and some conversations as necessary. We're also recording the session, so we will make sure to share that recording out and put it on the Women's Power Collaborative platform as well. And for those that aren't able to be here, or any networks that that you think should be here, you'll be able to share that recording with them as well. So really happy to have all of you here. Thank you for taking the time. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Whitney. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for making time in your day to be here. Everybody hear me okay? Okay, awesome. All right, I am going to figure out sharing my screen real quick. All right. So thank you all for being here. Today I am going to be talking about the viability of women candidates. And first off, I want to talk about what is the term. Why are you not working? Presenting. There we go. So talking about what is viability. So political success is made possible by this elusive idea of viability. And what does that mean? Most of the time it means, do you have what it takes to win? And what it takes to win often comes down to money. Not great ideas, not hard work, not leadership. Those traits are going to help you raise money. But at the end of the day, you're not going to win on those traits alone. You really have to raise money. And a lot of external factors will judge your campaign and its, quote, viability based on this. So money ultimately comes down to being key for candidates to be successful. So how did I get here and who am I? I wanted to just introduce myself. I've been interested in politics since I was a kid. I have this incredibly vivid memory of being in about the first grade and being on the playground at the elementary school I went to and telling a teacher that I was going to be the first woman president. Not on that trajectory as it goes right now, and that's okay with me. But basically, I've been interested since I was a little kid. For the past 15 years, I have worked on campaign side and the policy side of local government. And my campaigns have ranged in size from school board, city council campaigns, all the way up to statewide campaigns. So I spent most of my adult life working at city council, county council, etc. I moved into the other side of candidates as far as working for them on the policy side, and became a certified elections administrator. I worked in elections, so I know a lot about how that works from that side. And then about 2 years ago, I ran a statewide nonpartisan campaign for Secretary of State. And that campaign really opened my eyes to this viability and to the barriers that even highly qualified female candidates face. So the woman that I worked for refused to identify with political party, and even though a lot of her priorities aligned with Democrats and she was truly nonpartisan, we had a lot of Republican support. Um, the party ostracized her and essentially blacklisted anybody from working with her. And so as a result, like, we had to basically do everything. So I did all of her fundraising. I was her campaign manager. I was her events manager. I was her field plan. Like, and the barrier that we faced as a result of essentially having the party refuse to even allow folks to work with us was infuriating, and it led me to essentially found the Viability Project. I want the Viability Project to ultimately focus mostly on smaller races, but this was kind of where this drive came from, which was the structural things that women who don't play by the rules have to follow or have to deal with. So representation matters. I'm a mother. I'm a mother of small children. As we know from a lot of the partners, I saw that there was at least one person from Vote Mama in the room. That's one of my features, but your policymakers need to accurately represent your communities, whether that's parents, whether that's persons with disability, whether that's people with of color. Like, these policy choices that are made impact everyone in different ways, and we need to make sure that that is being those decisions are being made by people who accurately represent us. So ultimately, voters cannot cast ballots for candidates who lack the resources to run. And if you're a candidate who comes from a background that is not wealthy or is not politically connected, figuring out how to have the resources to run is an overwhelming idea, and often the barrier that prevents people from trying to run in the first place. So, what is money in the terms of political campaigns and political candidates? Money is voter contact. Money is being heard above the noise. Can you get your message in front of people, and can you get your message communicating well and meaningful, and have your true message actually be heard by the voters? Can you counter lies and disinformation that's spread about you? Do you have a team, or are you doing it all yourself? And ultimately, money is options. Do you want to run the race that you want to run, or do you want to run a race that you're forced to run because you don't have the ability to do what you want to do? So one of the things that I wanted to talk about here, apparently I'm gonna not have my nice little pie chart here. Anyway, disparate giving. So men make up 70% of political donations. Now, it's not just about the money, it's also about the amount of political influence and about the voices who are impacting that process. So even when men give to female candidates, men are giving that money. Male priorities are then being elevated and heard at a significantly higher rate than female priorities. And I'm using binary here because there isn't data that really talks about non-binary folks, but ultimately, like, female candidates generally tend to represent the entire spectrum much more fairly than male candidates. So let's talk incumbents, and there's a reason for talking incumbents. Incumbents are overwhelmingly male. So they inherently have an overwhelming funding advantage. 76% of districts currently have, or have had over the last few years, incumbents running for re-election. PACs largely underfund women, in part because they favor funding incumbents. They don't like to take risks. So PAC money has become incredibly influential in our politics, even at the local level. And PACs generally, when they make donations to challengers, they're small. They're hedging their bets. Even when you have an open seat and you have folks that have never been elected before, they tend to hedge their bets. PACs generally only fund candidates that they are familiar with and that have proven track records. So when you have 76% of districts running incumbents, and the incumbents are overwhelmingly male, the deck is completely stacked against women to be successful. just as a number there, the average winner of a congressional seat in 2020, an incumbent, they raised 32% of their total campaign funds from PACs. So when you're talking about maybe trying to challenge an incumbent, that's a tremendous funding disadvantage. So the other thing I want to talk about is women. So women have become very good at fundraising because, as women, you guys know this, that when we see a problem, we figure it out, we conquer it, we move on. But there's some structural disadvantages that I want to talk about. The Barbara Lee Family Foundation did a report called Ready, Willing, and Electable, and in their focus groups, voters acknowledged that women were held to different and higher standards when it comes to qualifications and likability. Many still actively participate in upholding those double standards. So people who have overcome them, joined in the system, still actively uphold those double standards and perpetuate that. Yesterday, there was an incredibly powerful conversation about Black women in politics that Victoria helped facilitate. And one of the participants shared about being in the State House for the first day and being told that the way she was dressed, the way her hair looked, etc., was not appropriate for the State House. That's kind of perpetuating these double standards instead of lifting each other up. Women can often match and even outraise men, but because it costs more to win as a woman, it costs more to convince folks that women are qualified. It costs more to present in the way that the structure and the system wants. It is just more, it's more money in order to be able to win. So these are a couple of slides that I used with Viability Project. And I want to talk about this. This was largely pulled from a Pew study that was done a couple years ago. So reality versus perception is also an issue when it comes to raising money. 28% of all members of Congress are women, but only 53% of adults say there's too few women in higher political office. These numbers generally translate down into your local level, although there tends to be more women at some of the local levels. It varies state by state. But in general, you still have this about 50-50 split where people don't think there need to be more women elected, even though we do not have gender parity in our elected offices. So again, when you're trying to raise money and you are maybe making a pitch about like, I want to be a woman, running for office and leadership, they're like, well, I don't know if we need more women. Is that something I want to pay for? I don't know. The other thing is the female disadvantage, and I want to point this out because I have young children and this is something personal to me. 48% of respondents in a Pew survey said that female candidates with young children were viewed negatively. It hurts those female candidates to have small children, whereas for men, it's a boost. Look, he's a family man. Look at that darling child. Look at this, all of these things. But for women, the answer is, well, who's going to take care of the children? Well, shouldn't you be at home with them? Well, are they being neglected? And so these structural disadvantages compound into making it more costly to win races because we're having to spend money as female candidates on these types of structural biases that we see. Come on. Since I'm having apparently a technical difficulty, is there a question we want to answer in this moment? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry everybody. So there's one final thing that really adds to this incredibly heavy burden for generically for women candidates. Women tend to rely on smaller donors and they do not fund their own campaigns. So even someone as prominent as AOC, very established, very much high profile, very much in the media, 70% of her contributions have come from small donors. 70% of her contributions are less than $200. So when you're looking at a fundraising goal of something like $10,000, that can come in, the way to get to $10,000 can come in a lot of different ways. You could get 4 donors to give you, say, $2,500, depending on your, financial maxims. 10 donors can give you $1,000. 20 donors could give you $500. 50 donors could give you the $200 that we're talking of. But 70% of AOC's donations are at that $200 or less. 100 donors at $100, 200 donors at $50, or 400 donors at $25. So when you were talking about trying to raise, say, $10,000, how many donors are you having to touch? Because all of those donor contacts cost time and money. If you're running a bigger campaign, are you doing text outreach? Are you doing emails? All of those things cost money. The more donors you have in your donor database, the more donors that you have to touch, the more expensive those various tools are. If you're making phone calls for folks, how many phone calls do you have to make to raise $10,000? Are you making 20 phone calls or less and getting these larger dollar donations? Or are you making 500 phone calls to try to get to that $10,000? And time is money. When you are a candidate, you only have so much time. You only have so much time for your campaign. So if you're raising money, which is something that is very hard to do by surrogacy, then you're not talking to voters. Then you're not reaching out to your local groups. You're not speaking in front of different community organizations. You are not building those community networks that may get you elected. So this structural idea that women can raise money is true. Like, women have been out raising men, but how much work does it take to get there? So one of the things that we could talk about as a good thing is women overwhelmingly give to female candidates, especially to Democratic female candidates. So a lot of my data and my work is focused on Democrats, but the numbers that I'm talking about and the experience that I'm talking about is actually even worse for Republican women candidates. Republican female candidates, they struggle even more than Democratic women. So women give to women, but only 30% of political contributions are from women. So again, we need to raise the bar ideally for women giving, and that's a really hard thing to do. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about women and money a little bit in the political sphere, but then I'm also going to talk more broadly about women and money in general. So let's talk about female candidates of color and their experience with money. Stacey Abrams, Queen. Okay, so there's a quote on your screen here, but I really want to read it, and I'm going to read actually a broader expansion of it because it is so meaningful to me. Not only do we lack the resources, women, and especially people of color, are typically viewed as beggars at the table, not bankers behind the desk. This perception means that even when we are primed for access, our engagement with money is met with suspicion and false impediments. And that is so true and so powerful. I've worked with many female candidates, and they may call a big donor. They get in that door. They get in the door to one of those high dollar donors. And one of the first things that the donor wants to ask is, what are you going to do with the money? They don't ask male candidates that. They ask female candidates that. What are you going to do with that money? Who have you hired to be your consultants? What is your field plan? They want to make sure that you know what you're doing before they write a check. And the incidences of that with male versus female candidates, women by far face that more often, and women of color especially. So here's some depressing numbers for a few minutes. Even amongst Democratic folks, in competitive primary and general elections, Black Democratic women challengers and open seat candidates receive significantly less money from large individual donors than any other group of candidates. This is Democratic donors. So progressive donors that we think we're, supporting women. Black Democratic women receive much less money from other candidates from early donors. Largely, Democratic early donors are dominated by educators and retirees, and these are the groups that power Democratic campaigns. These are the folks that do give in those small amounts and give often and give a lot. Women candidates often rely more heavily on female donors. However, women on average give half as much. So female donors even give half as much to Black women, Latina women, Indigenous women, MENA women, and Asian and Pacific Islander women candidates as they give to white women. So even as women, when we get women to donate, they tend to structurally give women candidates of color less. So I just want to take a moment and hold space for my women, female candidates of color who run, because Lord, I praise you. It's a hard world out there. One of the things that I often talk about with my candidates when I coach them on asking for money is about authenticity. If I write you a script, your donor is going to know if that script isn't really coming from you. If you're just reading a script that's not you, it's going to come off as very stiff. But women of color struggle to be able to show up as their authentic selves in day-to-day life, and especially with white people. They're also often subject to verbal or physical violence. So when they're calling someone and asking for money and it's an unknown, they're more likely to get sworn at, derogatory terms thrown at them, and that takes its toll. The other thing that's unique challenge to women of color is they are more often single parents, primary breadwinners. Women of color make 40 cents on the dollar. So the burden of running a campaign and asking for money is often harder when they have to keep so many balls in the air. Again, it goes back to how many donors are we talking to? Do I have to talk to 400 donors to get $25 donations? Or am I talking to 10 donors and getting $1,000 donations? That time burden and the risk of these negative impacts coming back onto those candidates all add up to these challenges. So, like I said, that's my downer part. But let's talk women and money, and let's talk about the future. Okay, so Ellevest is a women-founded, women-organized financial company, but their CEO has this quote that she put on everything, which is, "Nothing bad happens when women have more money." And I'm here for this, okay? So women control currently 80% of consumer spending and 60% of personal wealth, but they often do not realize this because we are not educated about money as women. And this is going to only accelerate these trends. The great transfer of wealth that has been kind of bandied about in the news as of late is by 2030, American women will manage at least $30 trillion. So this great transfer of wealth is basically baby boomers dying off and leaving inheritance to their children. And in this process of this transfer of wealth that they're talking about, with wealth concentrated in the baby boomer generation, women are coming out ahead. Women are going to be gaining more money than men out of this great transfer. And so if we currently are at this point, we as fundraisers, need to work on figuring out how to translate this into political power. Women have the ability to donate. It is just not something that they normally think about. Tori Dunlap, financial feminist. If anybody is not familiar with her, please make yourself familiar. The best way to smash the patriarchy is through financial power. Her entire ethos is about educating women about money. And some of the things that she talks about is that we live in a patriarchal world, a system that aids and abets inequality. In this system that has gate kept financial information and tools from marginalized group, it is an act of protest to be financially independent. It is an act of protest to overcome negative beliefs about money in order to save, pay off debt, invest, and find fulfilling work. It is an act of protest to prioritize rest instead of hustle, abundance rather than scarcity, and generosity in place of stockpiling. In a world that actively works to keep us playing small, it's an act of protest to be stable, content, and powerful. And so one of the things is that we as women actually have access to a lot of financial resources, but we have been kept away from understanding how to control those and how to leverage those into making the world that we want. So I wanted to have a happy moment here. After having a lot of downer information, all of those things that I talked about is we're Wonder Women. We are strong women. I see nothing but strong women in my day-to-day work. We are gaining incrementally. I'd like to see it faster, but we are gaining. And the women who are running and are getting elected are breaking barriers all across the country. So I want us to take a moment, take a deep breath, feel that power, and basically don't get brought down too far. So that's my presentation about women and money and the financial landscape. So thank you all for joining me for this. I have a slide of sources. A lot of it is folks that are in this room, organizations that are in this room, Represent Women does studies. The Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers did studies that I pulled this data from, but it's powerful to bring it all together to sort of look at that holistic picture of what women are facing when we try to fundraise. So that's me. I'd like to do some Q&A, I think, first, and I'm going to come off of presenting mode because I want to be able to like see faces, and then we can talk a little bit more about like me and my vision for stuff if we want to go there.
Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, anybody can jump in. Any questions, comments for Whitney, any of your own experiences you want to share, go ahead and come off mute, and we're a small enough group where we can, or go ahead and put your hand up and we can call on you. Yeah, Lainey, go ahead.
Whitney, thanks for your presentation. There was some good data there. I was wondering, since the incumbent protection gerrymandering that you touched on was 76%, are you involved with organizations that are working on ending incumbent protection gerrymandering or campaign finance reform, which are two systemic barriers?
They are major systemic barriers. Me personally, so like I said, I have 2 small children. I live here. I'm active in my community. I started this company 6 months ago. So I actually have focused more. Right now, I've gotten a whole bunch of local races for this cycle, but what I actually want to build is the idea of, and where I think my lane is accessible, affordable training on how to fundraise. So how do you make an ask? Coaching women through that, coaching women through how to develop a list. Where do I, try reaching out for money? How do I do that? And then, so this idea being that I'd like to have folks go through a training program like that that's affordable and accessible, and then be able to stay in like a mentorship, a peer mentorship group throughout their campaign. Right now, the model for most campaign consultant services is, oh, you have a campaign, here's your retainer. And as a campaign, you're paying a premium for a retainer, which especially for small candidates is very much out of their budget. So that's part of where I would really like to is empowering women to be able to do this. So yeah, that's where I've focused at this point. I am totally on board and aware of those structural things and would love to be supportive, but I'm not currently engaged in them.
Okay, thank you. But like Center for Women's Leadership at Rutgers or some of
Mhm,
these other, I know Vote Run Lead has a similar model to what you have with
mhm,
campaign training, but they're also supporting democracy reforms,
mhm.
like ending gerrymandering and campaign finance reform. Are you aware of any other national organizations that are working on those structural barriers?
Um, well, yesterday's presentation on Black women, there were a couple of orgs there specifically focused on supporting Black women candidates that were also trying to address those things. There's a couple organizations working on public financing, and I'm a big, because I come from that elections administration background, I'm a big supporter of ranked choice voting. So obviously, all of those fair vote efforts nationwide. Because fair vote or ranked choice voting also helps address that incumbency problem.
If it applies to the legislature or to those congressional seats.
Yes, yes, yeah. There's that challenge. Gotta start somewhere though.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Lainey. Yeah, Han, go ahead.
Thanks. Awesome presentation. And in fact, I have been thinking about this and working on something along these lines. And actually, a lot of the data that you pulled out in the slides that you had, I was like taking screenshots because I had actually asked Victoria to kind of help me pull together some things that I could use to kind of justify this big ask. And I've been finding, I'm with her term here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I do similar work working directly one-on-one with lots of candidates here at the state and local level. And the thing that, we've been finding is really that the traditional way of fundraising doesn't work for women of color
Yeah.
because they don't have that innate network to be able to do the Rolodexing. I can Rolodex all day with these people, but at the end of the day, they don't have the people that they can ask. And in fact, it's almost more damaging when you make them Rolodex and you make them start out with those asks from their friends and family, because when those rejections come, they hurt a lot more.
Yes.
And so we actually also do candidate support group on Wednesdays with therapists, and I see it then come through on Wednesday morning about how down it's brought them because their friends and family aren't supporting them. And so
Right.
one of the things that I've been kind of playing around, and I'd love to, talk to you offline about this too, is this idea of what I've been calling friendly fundraising. And the whole reason why this kind of came up was because I was gonna do a call time with one of these candidates, and I had the list, and I looked at this list, and I was like, she's not ready for this. She can't call these people. It's not going to work. And so I just texted a whole bunch of my friends and was like, hey, I've got a candidate. She just needs some practice. Are you willing to let her call and ask you for money? And
Yeah.
we got $1,000 that day just from my personal friends who were like, yes, I would love to be a part of this. I would love to be a part of this training. And so
Yeah.
what I think about is this, we have to do it on two sides, right? We have to get the women doing the exercise to actually want to give and to give more and to push them, and then also be able to train the candidates to be able to ask. And like until we address both sides of the equation, we're still going to be not
Yeah.
raising enough money. So I think my question for you is really just like, where do you see in terms of the way that you're coaching these candidates in the program to address those people that don't come from that place where that traditional fundraising works?
Yeah, that's I mean, that is one of the big problems. And so one of the things that I do is with my candidates is targeting donor lists. And so like I pull who gave to similar candidates, who gave to other candidates, female candidates of color, right, in the last couple of years, who's given to these certain things in these cycles. And so like when they're calling lists of donors, these are donors who've already given to candidates like them, and that helps. It still gets rejection, it's still cold calling, but they're at least cold calling candidate, or they're cold calling donors who are who are not likely to be negative, and help build that confidence there. I also do things like Democratic PCOs. These are small dollar donors. A lot of times they're only going to give $25, but again, having a conversation with someone who is not likely to be negative gives them that confidence. I absolutely love what you're talking about as far as, and it had not occurred to me, the idea of getting a list of folks that be willing to take these calls. And I love that, and I want to steal it.
Go for it. What are Democratic PCOs?
So the Democratic Party, all of, at least here in Washington, I think this is national, you have your districts all broken down ultimately into precincts, which is the smallest sort of area. And so the Democratic Party has elected precinct committee officers who are supposed to be like the field for their immediate neighborhood, the Democratic, flag bearer for their neighborhood. And so we have a reasonably good party infrastructure here in Washington State. And so that's also where I get some of those ideas of donors. And like I said, those are not big donors, but again, the donors that I'm selecting for them to call are less likely to be negative. And so, yeah, the other place to that I look for donors is like nonprofit giving. So are there nonprofits that support this kind of work, and can we bring that all into the fold? And so, yeah, I love the idea of creating like a cultivated list of people who are willing to take donor asks from this. But separate from that, that's how I've been doing the list, to try to minimize the chances of them getting negative reaction.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see another hand raise.
Yeah, my question was, you said that the women are not good in finance. When they're running for office, what do you suggest those women when it comes to structural change or to financial change for running for office?
Well, the women running campaigns are not necessarily the ones who aren't good with money, right? But that's a perception. And oftentimes it's also an ingrained thing. Yesterday, we talked about, this touches on the idea of women of color and female candidates running where their friends and family don't really have money to give. And if you come from somewhere where you come from a place of scarcity, or you come from a background where you did not have money, asking people for money feels absurd. And that's really hard to overcome. That's something that requires a lot of coaching and a lot of help, and doesn't necessarily feel authentic for candidates. So that's, I mean, I think one of the things, women in general are not generally taught things in finance. I'm one of those. Like, I found Tori Dunlap because I've been trying to like be a grown up with my money, because I was never taught about compound interest. I was never taught about investing. Women are often taught about very little about money. And, when I was growing up, not that my parents are necessarily, my dad's not, I don't know, he never like told me to stay home kind of thing, but like, it was just assumed I would never buy a house until I got married. That was a conversation to be had with your spouse or with your partner, not as an independent, as a person, right? So like, I probably could have bought some kind of a condo in my 20s. I had a great job when I was in my mid 20s out of college, and like, I never did. And so, because that was not even on my radar, and as an idea. So like, from the perspective of building long-term wealth, that is now not an option for me. I didn't buy my first property till I was in my 30s, and I was still single. And that was that I had to make a decision to do that for myself because I had been waiting for a partner to do that. So that's just a like tiny example of kind of what I'm talking about, that as women, we're not necessarily taught those things. We're not necessarily taught how to build generational wealth, or that we should be, you know, putting money in a retirement account, or that we should be investing, because it's just not part of our upbringing and education usually. Um,
So you're talking in that context, but usually when the females who run, they prepare for finances, how to raise money and everything. We used to attend those workshops where the women I was supporting, she's now commissioner right now in Georgia. So we used to attend those workshops, how to raise money and how to talk, even though they are not. That's what I was surprising. They are ready. They learn before they apply for and before they run. So usually women learn.
yes and no. I mean, one of the things that I found was that with running outside of a party structure, so younger women especially are often told to say, wait their turn, etc. And so if you end up where you're not being supported by the infrastructure of these political parties that exist, then it's really hard to get those kind of resources. And you're often left doing it all yourself. There is no support group, there's no team, there's no, you know, cheerleading squad to help you keep going when you do get knocked down, because you do. You know, especially asking for money is just like one of the most miserable things. I'm working with candidates all over the place, and like even white men, it's miserable for them to call people and ask for money. Like
Yeah.
um but like it's challenging when you run and you don't have any of that support. And that's, I think, what I find is women running for smaller races generally don't have that support. They didn't even know where to look for those kinds of trainings. They don't, you know, this goes back to candidate recruitment. This goes back to the idea of like, they don't know how to ask for money, or that they should ask for money, or their peer group doesn't know why they should invest in political races. Why does this even matter? And if you don't have that infrastructure or party support, and you show up at like a Democratic Party meeting and you're like, I want to run for office, and you get told to sit down, then you're kind of outside of all of that. And that's when often we lose candidates who otherwise could be extraordinary.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Alpana. Anyone else have any questions, comments for Whitney? Still have a little bit of time left if you want to continue forward with anything on her presentation or just this conversation in general, which I'm learning a lot. So I just learned what a compound interest is for those who would like to know. I Googled it and I learned a lot. So thank you. And go ahead and put your hand up. Whitney, anything else too that you want to add, feel free to jump in.
I want to run shameless plug for Tori Dunlap, the financial feminist. She runs a podcast, and I think it was last week she had a podcast where she talked all about the narratives that women tell themselves, or that I shouldn't say tell themselves, the narrative that society tells women and how that translates into financials. And I highly recommend it because it's not directly about political fundraising, but it has to do with basically how women think about money. And when you're asking for money, that matters, and how society tells women to think about money and to be small, to not take up power. It goes, I mean, yesterday's collaborative was so good. One of the candidates was like talking about self-care, right? Because running for office is exhausting, and self-care, and like society doesn't judge a man for buying themselves an expensive watch or going to play golf with his friends, or, you know, those kinds of things. But like if we buy the coffee or a nice purse, then it's frivolous. Right. So these are the ideas that like we have as a structural problem that end up compounding in to our subconscious and how we think about money when we ask for money. You know, do I really need that much money? Can I get away with not hiring somebody? Can I do this myself versus outsourcing it? Like these are narratives that we as women tend to tell ourselves internally, whether we realize it or not. And am I worthy of somebody writing me a check for that much money? You know, I can't believe that, like, kind of thing. And like, those are narratives that we internalize and we tell ourselves a lot of times subconsciously. I know I do. And if we want to be in our power as political individuals, we also have to address those.
I just want to actually echo that I had a candidate call me last week and she's like, "Hon, I think I made a huge mistake. I didn't want to spend any of this money that people were giving to me because I had in my mind that I could win this and I would be able to like have that benefit of giving the money back to them. And now I think I'm going to lose." And I was like, "Oh my God." You know, like they
Yeah,
don't want that money back.
right.
And so we talked about how she could spend it right now, but yeah, but you're totally right.
Yeah. Well, or things like childcare, right? We, in a lot of states now, that has been a huge piece. About Mama I know has worked on that, and a bunch of other groups, that like using campaign funds to pay for childcare. Men don't ever do that. That was never a conversation, right? But like, that goes back to the whole, like, who's taking care of your kids if you're out here campaigning? And women, it's more expensive to run. Women are the ones who bear that burden of childcare. Women are the ones who bear that responsibility. Men buy themselves suits with their campaign dollars, but heaven forbid that a woman go get her nails done, right? Or that kind of thing. But like, if you show up on TV and you don't have your hair done, or your nails, or you don't look good, then you get judged for it. Right. And this is this double standard and this expectation of where is our money going and how are we spending it, and where is it more expensive to be a woman versus a man.
I know Luis is putting a link in the chat too, and I remember at Luisa at your Vote Mama Lunch and Learn that you and Sarah had said such a like a number one question you get asked is like, I don't remember how you put it, but just in the conversation around campaign funds for childcare, like that getting policed and questioned so much more than anything else in terms of like, how is this really going to be used, and just all of those ridiculous questions that are getting asked when in terms of like fundraising and raising money for men. That's just something that's never even remotely questioned. Lisa, I don't know if you can probably say it a million times better than that, but that's something that really stuck out to me during your presentation.
Yes, no, you said it perfectly, Victoria. Don't worry. That yeah, we hear from moms all across the country, up and down the ballot, that they're asked over and over again, well, who's gonna watch your kids when you're sitting in office? Who's gonna watch your kids while you're on the campaign trail? And men don't get asked that question. And the sad reality is that if we're not looking at the barriers that affect moms, we will never achieve full gender parity, right? 85% of American women are moms by the age of 45, and they face unique structural barriers like that that mommy tax, right? Asking who's going to watch your kids. And when we've been, working on legislation in particular at the state level, the number one pushback is, well, what about abuse? Are people going to run for office just to pay for their childcare? If you've ever asked a mom that question, you would know that that's ridiculous, because childcare is so expensive. And this is just a drop in the bucket in helping moms be able to, eliminate one barrier to keep them from running for office. And so we have seen that pushback targeting childcare and not targeting that you can buy a car. In Hawaii, you can buy a car with no spending limit as long as you're driving it to and from campaign events. You can buy gala tickets. You can use it to pay for, admittance fees for social clubs and those sorts of things. But in 19 states, you are not allowed to use your campaign funds on childcare expenses.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up, Whitney.
Yeah, amen to that. And then also, like, the slide that I'd had, the Pew Research, is about more public opinion, and men see a bump when you put a picture of a male candidate with small children in front of them, and women see an even bigger disadvantage by putting their children on that, because that's the first thing that comes to most people's mind structurally is, well, what's going on with those children if mom's running? And that's goes, what can we do? I mean, that goes to each and every one of us doing what we can to address that structurally and systemically, and being conscious about that. I mean, I want to reiterate the point that it just broke my heart yesterday when one of the participants and being Black and elected said, you know, the first day of the state houses, why are you wearing tennis shoes and why does your hair look like that? And like, why are we policing that, you know, as human beings, right? And we need to call each other out on that. And women can often be the most critical of other women. And yeah, so once we know better, we can do better.
I'm also noticing what Allie put in the chat, who was running for the State House in Tennessee, of the question on how she would drive to Nashville every day, which is just classic. So Allie, thank you. Thanks for sharing. I'm glad to see you here. I'm also wondering too about how, Whitney, what you're saying, and Han, what you had mentioned about like giving the funding back and like feeling like we don't deserve the money when we're asking for donations, and just how that generally ties into just imposter syndrome for women, which I think it's just like so prevalent in general, but especially when you're running for an elected seat and just feeling like maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I actually shouldn't do this. I don't really have any experience. I don't really, like there's all this data that women need to be asked, what is it, like 7 to 10 times before we actually decide to run for office. And so I'm thinking about the significant imposter syndrome that exists for so many of us, feeling like we don't deserve or that we're not qualified for these seats. And then that translating into like, well, why would they give me, like, I don't even want to ask for a big donation because like, I don't feel like I deserve a big donation. So let me ask for a little. I did that with my campaign. I was like, I hated asking for money. That was like my least favorite part. And I really like I would just do like $5 Fridays and be like, hey, if you have time and you don't mind, and maybe if it's cool, you want to give me $5 and tell a friend. But I was never like, I never felt empowered to ask. It was actually my least favorite part, other than like door canvassing, I guess, of my campaign. So, and I think that really did tie into like levels of imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like I deserved it in a way. And I almost felt like bad for asking. And I know like my opponent raised so much money and did not feel bad about asking for money and more money. So it's so interesting how that all ties in. And Diane, I see your hand up too. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the comment about childcare, and the comment that Allie put in the chat, and I'm feeling like part of that, and what you said, Whitney, about that men with small children get a boost, and it's because there's this positive image of like, oh, he's a family man, which means he's not out carousing and like whatever I suppose single men stereotypically are presumed to do. Like, it's just, there's so many stereotypes. It's just like, don't even get me started. But I guess I'm thinking that part of that is that, men with small children are putting forth this picture of them with their family, with their small children, and also with their lovely wife, who presumably is the one who is staying home and taking care of the children. And so my question for you is, do you find that goes both ways, that when women run, and if women are married and have a family and put out a picture of them with their family and they say, here's my lovely husband who's staying home and taking care of the children, is that like, I don't know if there's data of like ferreting out, is it that she's not staying home, or is it that the husband is staying home? And like, I don't know, I'm not even wording the question very well, but I'm wondering if there's this negative impact of pushing back against the stereotypes that it's perfectly fine for men to stay, like that men should be the breadwinners, and if they're home taking care of the kids, she's imposing on her husband in some way or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have specific data in the political realm. Like the Pew study didn't ferret that out. But I can say anecdotally, and there is studies that back this up, which is like men show up like taking their kid, dropping off at school or going to the park, and it's like, oh look, he's such a great dad, look at these things, oh this is amazing, right? But as a mom, like that's every day. Like, and I think any mom in this room probably has had that experience of having, the husband getting applauded by society for doing something that's literally like our everyday drudge. I think about the overworked mom at the grocery store line, right? Versus like the husband who happens to take the kids to, and also like going back to the idea of like moms in our overall picture of society, dad takes the kids to the playground. What does mom do? Mom doesn't go out and play golf or do something like that. Mom tends to clean the house. Oh my gosh, I took a shower without being interrupted, right? These are the milestones of where our expectations for ourselves are. And so yeah, I don't have a specific answer to you, but I think that that's much more of that what people preconceived notions see when they see a family like that. If mom is putting herself out professionally, is the assumption is dad's also working, so then who is taking care of the kids? Versus the assumption in society historically of, well, mom's taking care of the kids, and that's therefore, they're cared for basically. I mean, you kind of saw this to some extent when the Obamas ran, and I believe it was Michelle's mom was so present, right? So grandma was present, very present with the kids and with the family portraits, because clearly grandma was filling in those gaps for the professional parents and in that child care. And I think it's unfortunate that as women, like, we even have to answer that. Like, as a mother, the most important thing is my children. And like, how could you question whether or not I'm leaving my children in good hands? Like, because they're the most important thing in the world to me. Like, I'm not doing this unless it's like, truly passion. So the fact that that's even like a question is just, again, it underscores the lack of trust in women's decision making, which goes back to like abortion bans and other things. Like,
Well, thank you for the presentation. This has been
you're
great.
welcome.
Thank you, Diane and Whitney. And we see we have about a minute or so left. And we have Allie, go ahead.
Hey, so I wanted to make a comment on that really quick as a young woman running in Tennessee. So I work 2 jobs on top of running for office, on top of being a mom and a wife. And I'm the one that takes care of the house, the cleaning, the cooking, and the kid. And on top of the jobs and the campaign, my husband works. And when he's home, he helps where he can. But I still do everything else. And it's interesting because when I'm out at events or when I'm out talking to potential donors or constituents, the resounding difference between men and women is women are very much like, I don't know how you do it. Like, you're superwoman. Like, I couldn't do that. Like, I am so like, I envy you, but I don't want to be you kind of like, approach. Like, you're doing amazing work and we're so proud of you. And the men, it's always, what does your husband think about you running for office?
Yep.
Does your husband support you?
Yep.
Did you talk to him before you did this? And I'm like, yeah, my husband supports me. He supports me in anything I do. But what does it matter what he thinks about me running for office? This is what I know I want to do and what is right. But like, they completely dismiss everything else about me as a person, the work I do, what my platform is. And it's, oh, what does the man think?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if my husband didn't want, my husband's not personally, I wasn't really political before either. But he's not a political person. If he doesn't have to be at a campaign event, he will not be there. And quite frankly, I don't want him there because he just looks miserable the whole time anyway. So I'm like, just stay home. I'm not going to force you to do that. But he supports me nonetheless. But he's not out actively like talking about my campaign to people. He's not out, knocking doors with me. He's very much on the line of, if I need to go to an event that's not very much kid friendly, he's like, I'll stay home with the kid so you can go do your thing. But if I need him somewhere, he's there. But it's very vastly different, the approach that men have when they talk to a female candidate. They just want to know where the man is. Is he running everything? What are you doing? Like, so it's quite a disgusting approach. And I'm 20. I just turned 29 a couple months ago, and I've learned very quickly how misogynistic the system is, especially here in Tennessee. And I keep getting told that do you know that you are about to go into a very toxic environment that, you know, you're not going to be treated equally or fairly, and they're not going to take you seriously? And I'm like, is that supposed to like demotivate me? Because all that does is motivate me more. But yeah, so I wanted to share that little tidbit as somebody who's currently running, and maybe some of you who have ran before have heard or felt the same.
Allie, I applaud you. I applaud you so
Allie.
much.
I was gonna say, Allie, thank you so much. We're so glad you're here. Please keep us posted as well on your race. But we are, you know, all like there. I just felt all of us like collectively feeling, you know, the what you're going through and the misogyny. So we really appreciate you and thank you for sharing your experience, because I think that's really important. That's what we want to hear from, especially candidates. So we are wishing you the best of luck. And I know that we are at time. So I want to take a minute to thank Whitney so much for this presentation, this very necessary discussion. I feel like we had a lot to talk about. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need more time. This is a good conversation. So thank you so much. We recorded the session, so we'll make sure that we share it out with all of you. Like we said, we do lunch and learns every month. We actually have 2 this month. So we have one happening on May 30th that is on what is it on? It's on universal voting, the case for universal voting. I just pulled that right out of my head. It is by 100% democracy. And I believe we will have a couple either candidates or state reps at that lunch and learn as well on May 30th. So we'll make sure that we send that information out to you as it is available. And really quick, before everybody leaves, can everybody go down to your reactions really quick and choose a heart and put the heart on your screen? And we're all gonna say, thank you, Sia, because this is Sia's second to last day with Represent Women as a Represent Women intern. And Sia has been with us since October. She's been to every lunch and learn, and she's done such incredible work. And her last day at Represent Women is tomorrow. And then she will go off into the world and do amazing things. And so Sia, thank you so much for being here. These would not be possible without you, and we will miss you very, very much. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We will